Sierra Leone, right. Lush landscapes, minerals galore, coastlines teeming with life. Sounds like paradise, wouldn't you think?
You'd think so, yeah.
But here's the thing. It's actually one of the poorest countries in the world. And that contrast, that's where our deep dive starts today.
Hmm.
We've got this article, really fascinating, about these paralegals in Sierra Leone.
Mhm.
And they're taking on, get this, these huge multinational companies fighting for land rights.
It's a classic David and Goliath story.
It is. But with some twists, believe me.
What's striking is that we see this pattern all over the world, really. Resources that should be helping communities, instead they become a source of conflict. It's called land grabbing, and it's at the heart of what's happening in Sierra Leone.
Okay, so land grabbing, what exactly does that even mean?
Okay, imagine this. You've got these multinational corporations. They swoop in, right? Make deals with the government. They exploit the resources, mining, agriculture, you name it. And the problem. The local communities, the people who've lived there for generations, they rarely see any of the profit.
It's like a modern-day gold rush. But instead of panning for gold, they're taking resources, and the locals get left behind.
Exactly, and it's happening on a huge scale. There was a study from the University of Lagos. Almost 40% of Sierra Leone's arable land, it's controlled by foreign corporations.
Wow, 40%.
That's a massive chunk of land that could support local communities, but it's going to profits for outsiders.
It's heartbreaking. The article talks about a community that had to relocate because a company's mining operation completely destroyed their water source, their whole way of life, just gone.
The human cost of land grabbing. These aren't just numbers. These are real people whose lives are being turned upside down. And a lot of times, these deals, they're done in secret, behind closed doors, leaving communities completely in the dark.
No wonder there's so much frustration and anger. Yeah. So tell me about these paralegals. They're stepping into a really tough situation, it seems.
They're the unsung heroes, really. They work with an organization called Namati, going into these communities, providing legal education, giving support. Think of them as frontline legal warriors, you know?
Okay, but they're not actually lawyers, right?
Right, they're paralegals, so they have training in legal stuff, but they don't have full law degrees. And this is so important in Sierra Leone because access to lawyers, especially in rural areas, it's really limited.
So they're filling a crucial gap.
Exactly, bringing that legal knowledge, that power to the people who need it most.
One of the paralegals, Abdoulaye Tami, I think it was, he said, the legal system in Sierra Leone is heavily concentrated in the city, leaving rural areas without much support.
That's it. These paralegals are bridging that gap, traveling to these remote villages, sometimes on foot, motorbike, sometimes even by boat, just to reach the people who are most vulnerable.
That's amazing. They're going up against these huge corporations, navigating these complex legal systems with such determination.
They're making a real difference. One of the areas they're really focused on is protecting mangroves.
Oh yeah, mangroves. Those trees, they've got the crazy roots that look like they're walking on water. Always been fascinated by them.
They're more than just fascinating. In Sierra Leone, they're vital to the ecosystem and the economy. They're like nurseries for fish, protect the coastline from erosion. They even provide building materials.
So they're essential, not just pretty, which I'm guessing makes them a target for land grabbing.
Right. You've got this company called West Africa Blue, ACI for short. They want to lease these huge areas of mangroves to store carbon.
Carbon storage.
Yeah, they're going to sell carbon credits.
Okay, now we're getting into some complicated stuff. So carbon credits are like companies trying to offset their pollution by investing in green projects.
That's the basic idea. ACI is saying they'll give 50% of the revenue from these carbon credits back to the communities involved. Sounds good, right?
Yeah, protect the environment, support the locals, win-win.
But you have to look deeper.
There's always a catch, isn't there?
Think about it. You're in one of these communities. You've seen companies come and go, making promises. Then they disappear, leaving behind broken promises and a damaged environment.
So it's not just about the money. It's about trust and making sure those benefits actually reach the people.
Exactly. And that's where the paralegals come in. They're not just fighting for land rights. They're fighting for transparency, for these communities to have a real say.
Give them a seat at the table.
Exactly. Abdoulaye Tami said it best. This time, he said, we're making sure the communities are included every step of the way.
Empowering communities to have a voice in their own future.
That's what it's all about.
That's powerful stuff. It's not just waiting for someone else to solve the problem. What are they actually doing? Are they taking these companies to court?
They do that sometimes, but they also have a more proactive approach, something rooted in the communities themselves. They're working with the residents to create bylaws, Think of them as local laws that govern how resources like the mangroves are used and
Oh,
protected.
that's smart. Building a legal fence around the resources, giving those communities more control.
It's about shifting the power dynamic, right? Instead of corporations dictating terms, these communities define what responsible development means to them. And they're doing it in a way that respects their culture and
Or
traditions.
not just imposing a one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. Another paralegal, Golia from Bonth, he said, it's important to understand the culture and traditions of each community. We use local languages and customs to engage communities.
Building trust, making sure everyone feels heard. This is fascinating. You've got these dedicated paralegals going up against these multinational companies, using local knowledge and legal savvy to protect these vital resources. And then you've got this whole carbon credit market emerging, adding another layer of complexity. Where do we go from here?
It is a fascinating situation, yeah. You really see that tension between the global economy and the rights of local communities. And that carbon credit market, that's a whole other story.
Let's talk about that a bit more. We've touched on it, but for those of us who aren't, economists or environmental policy experts, can you explain how this whole carbon credit system works?
Absolutely. Think of it this way. Companies, they release a lot of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, things like that. They got to find ways to, reduce their impact on the climate.
Right, like all these companies promising to be carbon neutral or even carbon negative. But how do they actually do that?
That's where carbon credits come in. It's like this global accounting system for pollution. Companies that are polluting too much, they can buy these credits from projects that are actually removing carbon.
So like they invest in a mangrove forest in Sierra Leone
Yeah,
to offset their own emissions from, say, a factory somewhere else.
exactly. The idea is that by protecting these forests, you prevent more carbon dioxide from getting into the atmosphere. It's a market-based solution to a global problem.
So ACI, that company we talked about, they would earn carbon credits by protecting the mangroves. Then they sell those credits to other companies.
Exactly. And that's the money that supports the project, and hopefully the local communities too. But, and this is a big but, there are a lot of concerns about whether these carbon offset schemes actually do what they promise.
Right, the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
How do we know if these projects are actually beneficial for the environment and for the communities? How do we prevent greenwashing? Companies just buying their way out of actually reducing emissions.
That's the big question. And the paralegals are dealing with that too. They want to make sure these carbon credit projects are actually designed to help the communities. They're not just taking ACI's word for it, they're holding them accountable.
They're like watchdogs, making sure things are done right.
Yeah. They're working with the communities to create these agreements that say how the carbon credit money will be managed and used. And they're pushing for transparency, making sure the communities have all the information.
So a system of checks and balances to prevent exploitation? Do these communities even have the expertise for all this? These negotiations sound complicated.
That's another thing the paralegals do. Legal education. They're not just representing communities in court, they're giving them the knowledge and skills so they can understand their rights, advocate for themselves.
So they become active participants, not just passive beneficiaries.
Exactly. It's about shifting that power dynamic, making sure communities have a say in their own future. And it's not just about this one project. It's about creating a model for responsible development. That can be used for other projects too.
This makes me think about the bigger picture. We're talking about Sierra Leone, but this land grabbing, it's happening everywhere, right?
Oh, absolutely. Anywhere you have valuable resources, land, minerals, water, you'll find companies and governments wanting control, often at the expense of local communities. And the climate crisis just makes it more complicated. Companies are scrambling to offset their emissions.
So Sierra Leone is really a microcosm of a much larger issue.
Exactly. And it shows how urgent it is to have strong laws and real community involvement to make sure development is actually sustainable and fair.
Finding that balance, right? Economic growth, but also protecting people's rights.
It's not easy, but it's essential.
It's essential for a more just and sustainable future.
It's inspiring, really, what these paralegals are doing. They're not waiting for someone else to fix things. They're taking action, empowering communities, showing that you can challenge the system and fight for something better.
It gives me hope.
It should. It shows that even against huge odds, individuals can make a difference. And that collective action, when it's based in the community and fueled by knowledge, can create real change.
That's a powerful message. We've been talking a lot about mangroves and carbon credits, but you mentioned earlier that land grabbing takes many forms. What are some other ways land is being taken in Sierra Leone? And how are communities affected?
That's a great question. It's important to remember that it's not just about this one project. Besides mining and agriculture, there's also been a big increase in land being bought for tourism. Big resorts, golf courses, that kind of thing.
Right. Tourism is supposed to help the economy create jobs, but it can also have a negative side,
Right.
especially when it comes to land ownership and pushing local communities out.
Exactly. And that's what we're seeing in Sierra Leone. Coastal communities, often those who depend on fishing or small-scale farming, they're being forced off their land to make way for these mega resorts. And they're often not properly compensated or even consulted in the process.
So profits over people, again.
And the environment. These big tourism developments often have a huge environmental impact. Deforestation, habitat destruction, pollution, short-term gains for a few, at the expense of long-term sustainability for everyone.
It's a familiar pattern. And I bet these tourism projects are also full of secrecy and backroom deals.
You got it. Transparency and accountability are really missing in a lot of these land deals. And that's why legal empowerment is so important. Communities need information. They need to know their rights, and they need a voice in the decisions that affect their lives.
It's about shifting that power dynamic, right? Making sure communities aren't just passive, but active participants in shaping their own future.
Exactly. And that's a long, complex process, but it starts with knowledge, understanding the laws, and building up the capacity of communities so they can advocate for themselves.
So these paralegals, they're not just lawyers. They're educators, community organizers, advocates for social justice.
They are, truly. And their work is crucial, not just for Sierra Leone, but for communities all around the world facing these same challenges of land grabbing and resource exploitation.
A reminder that even against these global forces, there are people fighting for what's right, empowering communities, defending the most vulnerable.
And they need our support, whether it's through donations to organizations like Namati, raising awareness, or pushing for policy changes. There are so many ways to get involved and make a difference.
We can't just sit back and watch this happen. We all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world.
And a more sustainable one. Protecting land rights is about social justice, but it's also about protecting the environment.
That's an important point. Land grabbing leads to deforestation, habitat loss, pollution, all of which contribute to the climate crisis.
So by tackling land grabbing, we're not just protecting communities, we're protecting the planet.
It's all connected. Social, economic, environmental.
You can't solve one without the other. We need a holistic approach, one that recognizes how everything is connected and puts the well-being of people and the planet first.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive. The situation in Sierra Leone, the carbon credit market, the broader issue of resource exploitation. It's been really eye-opening. So what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember? What should they be thinking about? Maybe even making changes in their own lives.
It is, isn't it? It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, from those individual stories to this global carbon offset system, I think for me. A big takeaway is that we talk about climate change and social justice as separate things. But this really shows how connected they are.
That connection is so important. When we talk about land grabbing, we're talking about disrupting ecosystems, displacing people, increasing inequality. It all makes the world less stable, more vulnerable.
And that vulnerability makes communities more vulnerable to climate change, too. Extreme weather, rising sea levels. It's like a vicious cycle.
Exactly. It's not just about protecting land in the abstract. It's about understanding that land. It's connected to people's livelihoods, their culture, their ability to deal with a changing climate.
So what can we even do about it? It feels overwhelming, you know, these massive forces at work. Does individual action even matter?
I get it. But I truly believe every action, no matter how small, can make a difference. The first step is awareness. The more we know about these issues, the better choices we can make. As consumers, citizens, investors.
So doing our own research, learning where things come from, paying attention to the companies we support, it all makes a difference.
It all adds up. And don't underestimate your voice. Talk about these things with your friends and family. Contact your elected officials. Support organizations doing the work on the ground. You can create pressure for change.
And the paralegals. They're so dedicated. How can we support their work specifically?
Groups like Namati, they rely on donations to train and support those legal warriors. Even a small donation helps a lot. You can follow their work online, share their stories, amplify their voices.
Awareness, individual actions, supporting those groups, all good things. But on a bigger level, systemically, What needs to change to stop land grabbing?
That's where it gets tricky, but also where the biggest potential for change is. We need stronger international laws that protects land rights and hold corporations accountable.
So more than just vague promises.
Exactly. And governments have to prioritize people over short-term profits. It's a change in mindset, really, realizing that sustainable development can't come at the expense of human rights and the environment.
Finding that balance.
Yeah.
Economic growth, social justice, environmental sustainability.
It's possible. There are communities all over the world finding ways to manage their resources sustainably, creating economic opportunities for everyone, standing up for their rights.
So it's not about despair. It's about finding solutions, highlighting what works, pushing for system change.
Exactly. We have to be realistic about the challenges, but also have hope and see the possibilities.
That's what keeps me going, that hope. And that's a good note to end on, a call to action, really. We all have a part to play in building a better world.
Absolutely. Our choices, our actions, our voices, they all shape the world we live in.
This deep dive has been so insightful. Thanks for sharing your expertise. And for reminding us that even with these huge global challenges, we can still do something.
It was my pleasure. I hope it's given our listeners some new ideas and inspired them to take action.
And to everyone listening, stay curious, stay informed, stay engaged. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep fighting for a better world.
See you on the next deep dive.